Lydia didn't know that the man searching the ancient library stacks was the Alpha King himself. She didn't know that her scent had led him straight through the maze of forgotten tomes and crumbling scrolls, and she certainly didn't know that when she pressed herself deeper into the shadows between the genealogy volumes, she was hiding from the one person in the entire kingdom who had been unconsciously searching for her his whole life. The morning had started like every other, her stepmother's sharp voice cutting through the estate's breakfast room. "Lydia, serve the guests properly. Try not to embarrass us further." The words landed like familiar blows, each one reinforcing what she had always known about herself. She was nothing, less than nothing. A charity case they kept around for the free labour, the bastard daughter her father had acknowledged but never truly claimed. Her stepsisters tittered behind their fans as she refilled their teacups with trembling hands. "Look at her dress," Celeste whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. "I threw that rag away 3 seasons ago." "Father should have sent her to the workhouses years ago," Margot added, inspecting her nails with bored cruelty. "At least then we wouldn't have to look at her." Something in Lydia's chest pulled tight, the familiar ache of being unwanted, unseen, unloved. She finished her service and fled to the one place in the sprawling estate where she could breathe. The library, her sanctuary. The vast room smelled of leather and dust and secrets. Hundreds of years of knowledge lined the walls, reaching toward vaulted ceilings painted with faded constellations. Most of the family avoided this place, finding it musty and boring, but Lydia had spent countless hours here, losing herself in histories and philosophies, teaching herself languages and mathematics that no one expected a servant to know. She had been working on a particularly complex genealogy project, tracing bloodlines through the ancient texts, when she heard voices approaching. Male voices, deep and authoritative. Every instinct she had developed over years of avoiding her family's wrath screamed at her to hide. Without thinking, she gathered her research and slipped into the restricted section, where the oldest royal documents were kept. The shelves here were taller, the spaces between them narrower, designed more for preservation than access. She pressed herself into the gap between 2 massive volumes on royal bloodlines, her heart hammering against her ribs. The voices grew closer. "The genealogy records you requested, Your Majesty, are kept in this section." That was Hoggins, the estate's nervous butler. "Though I'm not certain how accurate they might be, the family hasn't maintained them properly in decades, Your Majesty." Ice flooded Lydia's veins. The Alpha King was here, in her library. Her breath caught in her throat as footsteps approached her hiding spot, steady and certain. "Someone has been maintaining them," came a voice like dark honey, rich and warm and impossibly compelling. "This work is recent and brilliant." The footsteps stopped directly in front of her hiding place. Lydia squeezed her eyes shut, pressing herself further back against the cold stone wall. Maybe if she stayed perfectly still, perfectly quiet, he would move on. A large hand appeared in her peripheral vision, grasping the edge of the heavy tome that concealed her. The ancient leather binding creaked as it shifted aside, and suddenly golden sunlight from the tall windows illuminated her cramped hiding spot. "Hello, little one." Lydia's eyes snapped open, meeting the most extraordinary gaze she had ever seen. Storm-grey eyes flecked with gold, set in a face that was both beautiful and dangerous. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, despite his relatively young age. He was crouched down to her level, one hand still holding the book aside, the other extended toward her as if coaxing a frightened animal. She should have been terrified. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the realm, and she was nothing but a servant hiding where she had no right to be. But instead of fear, warmth bloomed in her chest, spreading through her limbs like honey. Something about his presence felt impossible, familiar, as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment without knowing it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to disturb anything. I was just—" "Researching. His voice was gentle, patient. "I can see that." He glanced at the papers clutched in her hands, and his expression shifted to one of genuine interest. "You've been working on the Thornfield bloodline, the connections you've drawn here." He paused, studying her work with increasing fascination. "This is extraordinary. You've found links that our court scholars missed." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I just like puzzles," she managed, still pressed against the wall. "I didn't think anyone would notice." "What's your name?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Lydia found herself drowning in those storm-grey eyes, feeling as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Lydia," she whispered, "Lydia Thornfield." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, recognition, something deeper she couldn't name. "Thornfield." He said her family name like he was tasting it, testing its weight. "You're part of the family that owns this estate." Shame washed over her, cold and familiar. "Not really. I work here, I help with things. I'm nobody important." His expression grew fierce for just a moment, something protective and possessive flashing in those golden-flecked eyes. "No," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You are definitely somebody important." Before she could respond to that impossible statement, before she could process the way his words made something inside her chest flutter with desperate hope, footsteps echoed through the library, her stepmother's voice sharp with panic. "Your Majesty, we seem to have misplaced one of our staff. Have you seen—" The Alpha King rose smoothly, his large frame blocking Lydia from view. "I'm afraid I've been quite absorbed in these genealogy records," he said, his tone politely dismissive. "Remarkable work, truly. My compliments to whoever compiled these recent editions." "Oh, that's just some old research," her stepmother said quickly. "Nothing of importance. Now, about our missing girl." "I'm sure she'll turn up," he said with quiet finality that brooked no argument. "Perhaps we could continue our discussion in the drawing-room. I find myself quite curious about the estate's history." Their voices faded as they moved away, but Lydia remained pressed against the wall, her heart racing for entirely different reasons now. The Alpha King had protected her. More than that, he had praised her work, called her important, looked at her as if she mattered. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and racing hearts. Theron, he had insisted she call him by his given name when they were alone, returned to the library each afternoon under the pretence of continuing his historical research. But Lydia knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that he came for her. On the second day, he found her hunched over a particularly challenging section of ancient bloodline records, her fingers stained with ink, her lower lip caught between her teeth in concentration. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression of such focused intensity that heat bloomed across her cheeks. "Show me," he said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. Close enough that she could smell his scent, cedar and rain, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. With trembling hands, she spread out her carefully annotated charts. "The Blackwood line here," she said, pointing to a series of connections she had traced through multiple texts. "Everyone assumes it died out in the plague years, but look." She pulled forward a crumbling marriage register. "Lady Eleanor Blackwood married a common merchant, took his name. Her descendants have been hiding in plain sight for 3 centuries. Theron leaned closer, studying her work, and Lydia's breath caught as his shoulder brushed hers. The golden thread sensation that had started during their first meeting intensified, spreading warmth through her entire body. "Remarkable," he murmured, but when she glanced up, he wasn't looking at the papers any more. He was looking at her. "You have a gift for seeing what others miss." "It's just puzzles," she whispered, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how his eyes seemed to hold flecks of actual gold in the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. "No," he said firmly, "it's brilliance. You've done work here that would put our court genealogists to shame." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "Lydia, do you know who I am, really?" She bit her lip, studying his face. The strong jaw, the commanding presence, the way everyone in the household had jumped to attention the moment he arrived. "You're the Alpha King," she said finally. "Theron Ashworth, ruler of the Four Kingdoms." "And do you know why I'm here? What brings the ruler of the Four Kingdoms to a minor estate library?" Her stomach twisted with sudden fear. Had she done something wrong? Was her research somehow treasonous? I don't know. Political matters, I assume. Things above someone like me." His expression grew fierce again. That same protective flash she had seen when she called herself nobody. "Someone like you," he repeated slowly. "Lydia, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his and felt like she was drowning in storm-grey depths. "I came here because reports reached the capital of unusual genealogical discoveries being made at the Thornfield estate. Work that suggested someone with extraordinary skill was piecing together bloodlines that had been lost for centuries." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I came here looking for that someone. I came here looking for you." The words hit her like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I'm just a servant. I clean chambers and serve tea and try to stay out of everyone's way." "Whose daughter are you?" The question was quietly asked, but something in his tone made her straighten. "Lord Thornfield was my father, but he's dead now, and I don't really belong here. My stepmother keeps me around out of charity." "Your mother?" Pain lanced through her chest. "She died when I was small, Lady Catherine Thornfield, but she wasn't anyone important. That's what they always tell me." Theron was very still for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating eyes. Then he reached for one of the genealogy texts she had been working from, flipping through pages with practiced ease until he found what he was looking for. "Catherine Thornfield," he read aloud, "born Catherine Blackwood, only surviving child of the Blackwood line, married to Lord Edmund Thornfield in a love match that scandalised both families." He looked up at her, his expression gentle but serious. "Your mother wasn't nobody, Lydia. She was the last known heir to one of the oldest bloodlines in the kingdom, which makes you—" "No." The word came out as barely a breath. "That's not— They would have told me. If I was someone important, they wouldn't treat me like—" "Like what?" His voice had gone dangerously soft. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Like I'm worthless, like I'm nothing, like I should be grateful for scraps and cast-off clothes and a servant's room in the attic." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. When she finally looked up, Theron's expression was thunderous. "They know," he said quietly. "Your stepmother knows exactly who you are and what your bloodline means. She's been keeping you as unpaid labour while denying you your rightful place." Before Lydia could process this revelation, footsteps echoed in the main library. Her stepmother's voice, sharp with barely concealed anxiety. "Your Majesty? I do hope the library has been adequate for your research needs." Theron rose smoothly, but not before his fingers brushed against Lydia's hand. The touch sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she saw his eyes darken in response. "More than adequate," he replied, his public voice politely formal but carrying undertones that made Lydia shiver. "The recent genealogical work here is truly exceptional. I find myself wondering about the scholar responsible." "Oh, that old research. I believe it was compiled by various staff members over the years. Nothing systematic, I'm afraid." Lydia watched Theron's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I see. Well, I would very much like to meet this remarkable scholar. Perhaps arrangements could be made." Her stepmother's laugh was brittle. "I'm afraid most of our staff are far too busy with their duties to spare time for conversation with guests, even honoured ones such as yourself." "Of course." Theron's tone was perfectly pleasant, but something in it made the hair on Lydia's arms stand up. "Perhaps tomorrow, then. I find myself quite invested in continuing this research." After her stepmother left, Theron turned back to Lydia, who was still sitting frozen in her chair, trying to process everything she had learned. "They're afraid," he said simply. Your step-family. They're afraid that someone will recognize what you are and take you away from them." "What I am?" she whispered. He crouched down beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. "Brilliant, beautiful, noble-born despite what they've made you believe, and if I'm not very much mistaken." His voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to something deep in her chest. "You're mine." The golden thread sensation exploded into full awareness, like a rope of pure light connecting her heart to his. She gasped, one hand flying to her chest, and saw answering recognition blaze in his storm-grey eyes. "You feel it too," he said, wonder colouring his voice. "The bond." "I don't understand," she breathed. "Neither did I, until 3 days ago, when I walked into this library and caught your scent." He reached up, his fingers hovering just shy of touching her face. "May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and his fingertips traced along her cheek with reverent gentleness. The touch sent warmth cascading through her entire body, and she leaned into it without thinking. "I've been alone for so long," he whispered, "searching for something I couldn't name. And here you were, hidden away in a library, brilliant and brave and perfect." "I'm not perfect," she protested weakly. "I'm nobody. You are everything," he said with quiet intensity. "And I am going to make sure that everyone knows it." The next 3 days passed in a strange rhythm of anticipation and wonder. Each afternoon, Theron would arrive at the library with some official pretext, consulting historical records, reviewing territorial documents, researching trade agreements. But within minutes of his stepmother's departure, he would settle beside Lydia at the small reading table she had claimed as her own, and the rest of the world would fade away. On the 4th day, he appeared carrying a cloth bundle that smelled like heaven itself. "You missed breakfast again," he said quietly, setting it down beside her research papers. Lydia's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I don't usually... I eat in the kitchens after everyone else is finished. It's not proper for me to—" "Stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "Please don't apologize for their cruelty." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal fresh bread still warm from the ovens, soft cheese, sliced apples, and delicate pastries that she recognized from the family's private dining room. Food she had served but never tasted. Her stomach betrayed her with a soft growl, and his mouth curved into the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable despite his commanding presence. "Eat," he said simply, "while you tell me about these." He gestured to the papers spread before her, covered in her careful notations about bloodline succession laws. As she nibbled at the feast he had brought, trying not to devour it like the starving person she often was, she found herself talking more freely than she ever had with anyone. About the patterns she saw in the old records, the inconsistencies that suggested deliberate omissions, the way certain names appeared and disappeared across centuries with suspicious regularity. "The Crown has always struggled with legitimacy questions," Theron said thoughtfully, breaking off a piece of bread and offering it to her. "Wars have been fought over bloodline claims." "But they don't have to be," Lydia said, warming to her favourite subject. "Look at this." She pulled forward a chart she had been working on for weeks. If the succession laws acknowledge maternal lines equally, if nobility could be earned through service instead of just inherited, if marriages between classes weren't forbidden, most of these conflicts never would have happened. She looked up to find him watching her with such focused intensity that her words dried up. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it's not my place to have opinions about such things." "Your place," he said quietly, "is wherever you choose to make it." His fingers found hers across the table, and the golden thread sensation hummed to life between them. "Tell me about your dreams, Lydia. If you could do anything, be anything, what would you choose?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. I used to dream about teaching," she admitted softly. "Opening a school where anyone could learn, regardless of their birth. Common children deserve to read and write and understand mathematics just as much as noble ones. His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending warmth shooting up her arm. That's a beautiful dream. It's foolish. I'm nobody. I have no money, no connections, no— You have a brilliant mind, he interrupted. You have compassion and vision and courage. You have everything that matters. Something in his voice made her look up sharply, and she found herself drowning in those storm-grey eyes again. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility and want, and something deeper she didn't dare name. "Theron," she whispered, not even sure what she was asking. He leaned closer, his free hand rising to cup her cheek. "I know this is fast," he said softly. "I know it doesn't make sense, but I've never felt anything like this before, this pull toward you, this certainty that you're— That I'm what?" Her voice was barely audible. "Mine," he said simply, "and I'm yours, if you'll have me." Before she could respond, before she could process the impossibility of what he was saying, his lips were a breath away from hers. She could feel the warmth of him, smell the cedar and rain scent that was purely him, see her own desperate longing reflected in his eyes. The library door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. They sprang apart as her stepmother swept in, her face flushed with exertion and suspicion. "Your Majesty, I do apologize for the interruption, but I've been looking everywhere for—" Her gaze fell on the remains of their impromptu picnic, the way Theron's hand was still reaching toward Lydia, the obvious intimacy of the scene. Her eyes went ice-cold. "I see," she said slowly. "How enterprising of our little servant to ingratiate herself with our honoured guest." Lydia's blood went cold at the venom in her stepmother's voice, but Theron rose smoothly to his feet, placing himself between them with fluid grace. "Lady Thornfield," he said, his tone politely pleasant, but carrying undertones that made Lydia shiver. "I was just discussing some fascinating genealogical discoveries with Miss Thornfield. Her research has been invaluable to my work." "Miss Thornfield?" Her stepmother's laugh was brittle as glass. "Your Majesty, I fear there's been some confusion. This is merely Lydia, our servant. She helps with cleaning and kitchen work. Certainly nothing that would interest someone of your stature." "On the contrary," Theron said quietly, "I find her work exceptionally interesting. In fact, I was hoping to discuss extending my stay to continue our collaboration." Her stepmother's face went white, then red, then white again. "I see. Well, perhaps we could arrange for one of my daughters to assist you instead. They've had proper education. Unlike—" "No." The single word carried enough authority to silence a kingdom. "I prefer to work with Miss Thornfield." After her stepmother left, muttering excuses and shooting venomous glances at Lydia, an uncomfortable silence settled over the library. Lydia kept her eyes fixed on her hands, which were trembling in her lap. "She's going to make my life hell," she whispered. "No," Theron said firmly, "she's not." He knelt beside her chair, tilting her chin up until she met his eyes. "I won't let anyone hurt you, not any more." "You don't understand," Lydia said desperately. "When you leave, I'll still be here, still be nothing, still be—" "Come with me." The words hung in the air between them, like a challenge and a promise. "What?" she breathed. "Come with me," he repeated, "to the capital. Be my genealogist. Help me reform the succession laws you were talking about. Make your school happen." "I can't," she said automatically. "I'm nobody. People like me don't just leave for the capital with the Alpha King." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You are not nobody," he said with quiet intensity. "You are brilliant and beautiful and brave. You are noble-born and worthy of every dream you've ever had. And if you let me—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "I will spend every day proving it to you." She stared into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and want and something that looked dangerously like love. The golden thread between them pulsed with warmth and possibility. For the first time in her life, Lydia allowed herself to hope. "I'm scared," she admitted in a voice barely louder than breath. "Then we'll be scared together," he said simply. "But don't let fear keep you from living." Outside in the corridor, footsteps approached again, quicker this time, more determined. Her stepmother's voice carried through the heavy doors, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone else. "She's going to try to separate us," Lydia said with sudden certainty. Theron's expression grew fierce. Let her try. The storm broke at dinner. Lydia had tried to stay away, tried to hide in her attic room, as she always did when the family entertained important guests. But her stepmother had specifically summoned her, ordering her to serve at the formal dinner being held in Theron's honour. The command had come with a smile sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that promised retribution. She should have known it was a trap. The great hall blazed with candlelight, the long mahogany table groaning under the weight of the finest china and crystal the estate possessed. Theron sat at the head of the table in the place of honour, devastatingly handsome in his formal clothes, every inch the powerful Alpha King. Her stepsisters flanked him, preening in their finest gowns, competing for his attention with simpering smiles and calculated touches. Lydia moved through her duties like a ghost, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates with the practised invisibility of someone who had spent years learning to be overlooked. But she could feel Theron's eyes following her movements, could sense his growing tension as the evening wore on. "Your Majesty," Celeste was saying, leaning forward to display her considerable assets, "perhaps you would honour us with a dance after dinner. I've been told I have quite a talent for it." "Or perhaps you'd prefer a private tour of the gardens," Margot added, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "The moonlight is particularly lovely this time of year." Theron's responses were politely non-committal, but Lydia caught the way his jaw tightened with each batting eyelash, each coy suggestion. She was reaching across the table to refill his wine when her stepmother's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a blade. "Girls, girls, you're being far too forward," Lady Thornfield said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes, "though I suppose His Majesty is quite used to feminine attention. I do hope our humble hospitality has been adequate, especially given the unusual circumstances of your research." Something in her tone made the hair on Lydia's arm stand up. She paused in her pouring, suddenly aware that every eye at the table had turned toward their end of the room. "Unusual how?" Theron asked carefully. Her stepmother's smile was all teeth. "Well, I couldn't help but notice how much time you've been spending in our dusty old library, and with such interesting company." The wine-glass in Lydia's hands trembled. She tried to step back, to fade into the shadows, but her stepmother's next words froze her in place. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered our little servant has been playing dress-up, pretending to be a scholar to capture the attention of our distinguished guest." The silence that followed was deafening. Lydia felt heat flood her face as every person at the table turned to stare at her. Celeste's mouth fell open in shock. Margot looked like she was watching her favourite entertainment. The other guests, minor nobles and local dignitaries, whispered behind their hands with delicious scandal. "Mother," Lydia whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. "Stepmother," Lady Thornfield corrected sharply, "and you will address me properly, girl." She turned back to Theron with false regret. "I do apologise, Your Majesty. I'm afraid the child has been getting above herself lately, filling her head with nonsense about bloodlines and scholarship when she should be focused on her proper duties." "Her proper duties?" Theron's voice was dangerously quiet. "Well, yes, kitchen work, cleaning, serving. She's fortunate we've kept her on at all, considering her irregular birth." Lydia wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never face any of them again. The shame burned in her chest like acid, all her newfound hope crumbling to ash. Of course this was how it would end. Of course her stepmother would find a way to remind everyone, including Theron, exactly what she was. "How generous of you," Theron said, his tone still carefully controlled. But Lydia, who had learned to read the subtle shifts in his voice over their days together, heard the fury underneath. "We do our best to be charitable," her stepmother continued, warming to her theme. "Though I do worry the girl has developed some rather presumptuous ideas about her place. She's been claiming that her mother was somehow important. Can you imagine? Poor Catherine was a perfectly pleasant woman, but hardly anyone of consequence." "Is that so?" Something in Theron's voice made Lydia look up. His storm-grey eyes were fixed on her stepmother with laser focus, and his hands were very still on the white tablecloth. "Oh yes, just the daughter of some minor branch family, I believe. Nothing significant." Lady Thornfield waved a dismissive hand. "Though our Lydia seems to have convinced herself otherwise. The stories she's been spinning about noble blood and ancient bloodlines. Quite delusional, really." "Delusional," Theron repeated slowly. "I'm afraid so. The child has always had an overactive imagination. It's what happens when servants get ideas above their station." She turned to the other guests with conspiratorial glee. Would you believe she actually had the audacity to suggest she could be a scholar, a teacher? Can you imagine anything so ridiculous? The laughter that followed felt like knives against Lydia's skin. She clutched the wine pitcher to her chest and tried to breathe through the crushing weight of humiliation. "Ridiculous," Theron said quietly. Then he stood. The laughter died instantly. The Alpha King rose to his full, imposing height, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of someone who ruled kingdoms. "Lady Thornfield," he said, each word precisely enunciated, "you seem to be labouring under several misconceptions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her stepmother's face went pale, then red, then pale again. "Your Majesty, The first," Theron continued, ignoring her interruption, "is that Catherine Blackwood was a minor branch family member. In fact, she was the sole heir to the Blackwood bloodline, one of the oldest and most respected noble houses in the kingdom." Gasps echoed around the table. Lydia's stepsisters looked between each other in shock. "The second misconception," Theron said, his gaze never leaving Lady Thornfield's increasingly panicked face, "is that her daughter is merely a servant. Miss Lydia Thornfield, or more accurately, Lady Lydia Blackwood Thornfield, is nobility by birth and brilliant by nature." He turned then, finding Lydia in the crowd of stunned faces, and his expression softened for just a moment. "The third and most grievous misconception," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room, "is that she is anything less than extraordinary." He moved around the table with predatory grace, stopping directly in front of Lydia. The wine pitcher slipped from her nerveless fingers, but he caught it before it could shatter on the floor. "She is everything I've been searching for," he said, loud enough for every guest to hear. "Brilliant, beautiful, noble-born, and if anyone in this room has a problem with that," his smile was sharp as a blade, "they can take it up with me." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Theron reached up, cupping Lydia's face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "You are mine," he said softly, "for her alone, and I am yours, if you'll have me." Before she could respond, before she could process what was happening, his lips met hers in a kiss that tasted like claiming and promise and home. The golden thread between them blazed to life, and she felt something inside her chest unlock and soar free. When they broke apart, the entire room was staring in stunned silence. "Lady Thornfield," Theron said without taking his eyes off Lydia, "you are no longer welcome on this estate. You have until dawn to collect your belongings and leave." "You can't. This is my home." "This is Miss Thornfield's ancestral home," he corrected quietly. "And as the rightful heir to the Blackwood lands and titles, she is well within her rights to evict tenants who have mistreated her." He turned back to Lydia, his storm-grey eyes soft with something that looked dangerously like love. "The choice is yours," he said gently. "Stay and reclaim what's rightfully yours, or come with me and build something new. Either way, you'll never be alone again." Lydia looked around the room at the shocked faces, the overturned wine, her step-family's horrified expressions. Then she looked back at Theron, at the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, who had defended her when she couldn't defend herself, who was offering her everything she had never dared dream of. "I choose you," she whispered. His smile was radiant as the sun. 2 weeks later, Lydia stood in the royal palace's morning room, watching the sunrise paint the capital city in shades of gold and rose. She still couldn't quite believe this was her life now. The silk gown she wore, deep emerald green that brought out her eyes, had been made specifically for her by the palace seamstresses. Not cast-offs or borrowed rags, but beautiful things created just for her. Everything about her new existence felt impossibly luxurious. The room she had been given was larger than the entire servants' quarters at her step-family's estate, with its own sitting area and a private balcony overlooking the royal gardens. Servants brought her breakfast on fine china, addressed her as "my lady," and asked for her preferences instead of simply assuming she had none. But the greatest luxury of all was Theron himself. He appeared in the doorway as if summoned by her thoughts, already dressed for the day in the deep blue that marked him as Alpha King. Even after 2 weeks of waking up in his palace, seeing him every day, the sight of him still made her pulse quicken. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly, crossing the room to wrap his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the familiar warmth and safety of his presence. "Good morning," she murmured, tilting her head to accept the gentle kiss he pressed to her temple. "You're up early." "Council meeting," he said with a slight grimace. "But I wanted to see you before I got trapped in political discussions." His arms tightened around her. "How are you feeling about today?" Today, the day her life would change yet again. "Nervous," she admitted. "What if I'm terrible at it? What if I don't know how to act like a queen?" Theron turned her in his arms, his storm-grey eyes serious. "You won't be terrible. You'll be perfect because you're you." His thumb traced along her cheek. "And you don't need to act like anything. Just be Lydia, brilliant, compassionate, brave Lydia. That's all I've ever wanted." The coronation ceremony was still 3 days away, but today marked her first official appearance as his intended queen. She would sit beside him during court sessions, participate in policy discussions, and begin learning the intricate dance of royal politics. "I keep waiting for someone to realize this is all a mistake," she whispered, "that I don't belong here." "Hey," his voice was gentle but firm, "look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "You belong wherever you choose to be, and you've chosen to be here with me. That makes you exactly where you're supposed to be." Before she could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. "Your Majesty?" came the voice of Marcus, Theron's personal secretary. "The delegation from the Northern Territories has arrived early." Theron sighed. "Duty calls." He pressed a lingering kiss to her lips, and she felt the golden thread between them pulse with warmth. "I'll see you at court in an hour?" She nodded, and he squeezed her hands before reluctantly pulling away. The hour that followed was a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor, the head lady's maid who had been assigned to her, helped her into the formal gown that had been designed specifically for her court debut. Deep sapphire blue silk that complemented Theron's colours, with intricate embroidery that caught the light when she moved. "You look radiant, my lady," Elena said, securing the delicate tiara that marked her as the king's intended. "His Majesty won't be able to take his eyes off you." When Lydia entered the throne room, every conversation stopped. Nobles and courtiers turned to watch her progress down the long aisle, their expressions ranging from curious to calculating to openly admiring. She kept her chin up and her shoulders straight, channeling every lesson in deportment she had absorbed from watching her stepsisters over the years. But when she reached the raised dais where Theron waited, when he rose from his throne and extended his hand to her with that smile that was hers alone, all her nervousness melted away. "My queen," he said softly, for her ears only, as he helped her into the smaller throne beside his. The morning session passed in a blur of petitions and discussions. Theron consulted her opinion on several matters, treating her insights with the same respect he showed his most experienced advisers. When a dispute arose over education funding for rural villages, she found herself speaking passionately about the need for schools that served all children, regardless of birth. "An interesting perspective, Your Majesty," said Lord Blackstone, one of the older nobles, "though I wonder if such ambitious programmes might be beyond our current resources." "On the contrary," Lydia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The research I've been conducting suggests that educated populations contribute significantly more to kingdom prosperity. The initial investment pays for itself within a generation." She caught Theron's proud smile from the corner of her eye, and warmth bloomed in her chest. During the noon recess, as they walked through the palace corridors together, Theron pulled her into a quiet alcove. "You were magnificent in there," he said, framing her face with his hands. "Did you see how they hung on your every word during the education discussion? I was terrified I'd say something wrong." "You said everything right." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "I am so proud of you." The kiss that followed was soft and sweet, full of promise and affection. When they broke apart, Lydia felt like she was glowing from the inside out. That evening, as they shared a private dinner in his chambers, Theron spread a collection of architectural drawings across the table between their dessert plates. "What are these?" Lydia asked, leaning forward to examine the detailed sketches. "Your school," he said simply. She looked up sharply. "My what?" "The school you dreamed about, for children of all classes." He pointed to different sections of the drawings. "Classrooms here, a library here, workshops for practical skills. It'll be built just outside the capital, easily accessible to both city and rural families." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Theron, you can't. This must cost a fortune." "You can't put a price on dreams," he said softly, "especially not yours." She stared at the drawings, seeing her most impossible fantasy rendered in careful architectural detail. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me help you build it. Say you'll let me be part of making this happen." Instead of answering with words, she rose from her chair and moved to his side of the table. He pulled her down onto his lap, and she buried her face against his neck, breathing in his familiar scent. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. His entire body went still beneath her. "What did you say?" She pulled back to meet his eyes, seeing wonder and hope and something fierce blazing in their grey depths. "I love you," she repeated louder this time. "I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see the best in everyone. I love how you make me feel precious and worthy and brave. I love—" He silenced her with a kiss that tasted like forever, deep and claiming and full of promises. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said roughly. "So much it terrifies me. I've been waiting my whole life for you, Lydia. For this." The golden thread between them blazed to life, stronger than it had ever been, and she felt something deep in her chest settle into place. Home. This was home, not a place, but a person. This man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself, who was offering her not just his kingdom, but his heart. "When I was little," she whispered, "I used to dream about being rescued, about someone coming to save me from my step-family and take me away to somewhere better." His arms tightened around her. "And? I never imagined someone would save me by making me brave enough to save myself." His smile was radiant. "You were always brave, love. You just needed someone to see it." That night she lay in his arms in the massive royal bed, watching moonlight paint patterns across the ceiling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow, wasn't afraid of being discovered or abandoned or found wanting. She was home. 3 months later, Lydia stood in the same library where it all began, but everything had changed. The ancient stone walls now gleamed with fresh restoration, and golden afternoon light streamed through newly cleaned windows onto polished wooden floors. What had once been her hiding place was now the heart of their wedding ceremony. "Are you ready, my lady?" Elena asked softly, adjusting the train of Lydia's wedding gown for the 100th time. Ready. The word felt too small for what she was feeling. The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate pearls, designed to honour both her Blackwood heritage and her future as queen. The Blackwood family tiara, retrieved from the royal vaults and rightfully hers, caught the light as she moved. "More than ready," she whispered, and meant it. The ceremony was intimate by royal standards, only 100 guests instead of thousands. Nobles and dignitaries filled the rows of chairs that had been arranged among the towering bookshelves, but Lydia's eyes found the group that mattered most to her. Children from the capital's common districts, the first students of her new school, sat in places of honour near the front. Their faces glowed with excitement at being included in a royal wedding, but when the music began and she stepped into the aisle, she saw only him. Theron waited at the altar that had been erected beneath the library's great arched window, devastatingly handsome in his formal ceremonial robes. The crown of the Alpha King rested on his dark hair, but his storm-grey eyes held only warmth and love as he watched her approach. Halfway down the aisle, she heard a commotion near the doors. Her step-family had somehow gained entrance, Lady Thornfield's voice rising in shrill protest as palace guards moved to escort them out. "That girl has no right. She's nobody. This is all a mistake." Lydia's steps faltered for just a moment, old fears rising like ghosts. But then Theron's voice cut through the chaos, calm and absolute. "The only mistake," he said, not taking his eyes off Lydia, "would be allowing that woman to disturb our wedding for another second." The guards efficiently removed the disruption, and blessed silence returned to the library. Lydia continued her walk down the aisle, each step carrying her further from the girl who had once cowered in these very stacks and closer to the woman who would help rule a kingdom. When she reached him, Theron extended his hands to her with a smile that was hers alone. "Hello, little one," he said softly, echoing the first words he had ever spoken to her. "Hello," she replied, letting him draw her close. "Did you find what you were looking for?" His smile widened. "I found everything." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred promises. When the officiant asked if she would take Theron as her husband and king, her voice rang clear and strong through the library. "I will." And when it was Theron's turn, when he promised to love and honour her all the days of his life, she felt the golden thread between them blaze brighter than the sun. "You may kiss your queen," the officiant announced, and the library erupted in cheers as Theron claimed her lips in a kiss that tasted like forever. The reception was held in the palace gardens, but as the evening wore on, Lydia found herself drawn back to their library. She slipped away from the celebration, needing just a moment of quiet in the place where their story had begun. She found Theron already there, having had the same idea. He had loosened his formal collar and removed his crown, looking more like the man who had spent afternoons bringing her food and conversation than the king who had just married her before the kingdom. "Hiding again?" he asked with gentle humour, approaching her slowly. "Not hiding," she said, turning to face him, "remembering." He reached her and pulled her into his arms, swaying slightly even though there was no music. "What are you remembering?" "The girl who used to hide between these shelves," she said softly, "who thought she was nobody, who never dreamed she could have any of this. And what do you think now?" She looked around the transformed library, then up into his beloved face. "Now I think that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin in the most ordinary moments. A girl hiding in a library, a king looking for answers to old questions." "And finding something completely unexpected," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. A soft sound from the doorway made them both turn. A group of children from her school stood there, still in their wedding finery, eyes bright with excitement. "Your Majesty," said Sarah, one of her brightest students, "we wanted to thank you for inviting us, for the school, for showing us that stories can come true." Lydia's throat tightened with emotion. "What's your favourite kind of story, Sarah?" "The ones where people who think they're nobody become somebody important," the little girl said solemnly, "like you did." After the children left, chattering excitedly about the wedding cake and the dancing, Lydia settled into one of the comfortable reading chairs that now furnished the library. Theron took the chair beside her, the same arrangement they had shared during those first precious afternoons. "So," he said, reaching for her hand, "what happens next in our story?" She considered the question, thinking of the school that was already changing young lives, the kingdom reforms they were implementing together, the love that grew stronger every day. Everything," she said finally. "Everything we can dream of." He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her wedding ring. "I love you, Queen Lydia." "And I love you, my king." Outside the library windows, the palace gardens bloomed in moonlight, and somewhere in the distance, music from their wedding celebration continued to play. But here, in their sanctuary, surrounded by ancient books and newer dreams, they simply held each other and planned the beautiful future stretching out before them. Lydia closed her eyes and let herself remember, one last time, the terrified girl who had once pressed herself into these shadows, believing herself worthless and forgotten. That girl could never have imagined this moment, this love, this life. But then again, the most beautiful stories were always the ones that began with impossible things. The next morning found them in the library again, sharing breakfast and planning the curriculum expansion for the school. Lydia looked up from her notes to find Theron watching her with soft eyes, and she felt that familiar flutter of warmth in her chest. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking how perfect this is," he said. "You, here, exactly where I found you, except now I'm not hiding any more," she finished. "Now you're home." And she was, finally, completely home. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these stories of love, finding us exactly when we need it most. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these tales of hearts that refuse to give up on happily ever after.